Good afternoon, everyone. We're here once again to talk about the City of St. Louis 2023 HOME-ARP Allocation Plan. As a reminder, the city received a $10.6 million allocation of HOME-ARP dollars from HUD through the American Rescue Plan Act Fund. These funds are really focused on responding to critical housing needs of the unhoused and those at risk of homelessness. So we'll talk a little bit about our proposal. Let's go on to the next slide. And as some further context, we've been here before. We most recently held a public hearing on the HOME-ARP allocation plan in February and submitted that proposal to HUD to focus on the production of permanent supportive housing, supportive services, rental assistance to go along with it. The plan that we are sharing today is identical. We've made no changes to the plan. HUD, in fact, responded to our plan and essentially flagged for us that while substantively the plan was in good shape, HUD has updated its citizen participation requirements with the end of the COVID-19 emergency to require in-person public hearings and extended notice requirements. So what we're doing here today is we're holding the hearing in a hybrid format, both in person here at 1520 Market Street and online, and having properly noticed it in order to comply with HUD's citizen participation requirements. And just as a recap as well, CDA is a city department which serves as a clearinghouse for a variety of federal, state, and local funds, and we are charged by Mayor Jones with leveraging these funds to drive economic justice initiatives ranging from the production of housing, which we'll be talking about today, to providing public services to our youth, seniors, unhoused, and other marginalized communities in the city, and low to moderate income individuals critically in the city. And this is all a small piece of a much broader economic justice action plan to empower, develop, and transform St. Louis. The plan essentially stands for the idea that when we talk about development, it's not enough to talk about the built environment, about physical development. We need to start with people, with economic empowerment by investing into communities, into youth, into job training and workforce development, so that the community is lifted up along with the built environment and the buildings. So that's the empower prong. The develop prong is really about infrastructure like North-South Metrolink and like transit, like digital equity, and knitting our city together with transit, with vibrant commercial corridors, with equitable internet access and other assets. And then finally, the transformation prong is about housing and about vacancy and about transforming our vacant land from a liability into an asset, and ensuring that everyone in St. Louis and every neighborhood in St. Louis has quality, safe, accessible housing. And again, we'll be focusing on the housing prong of CDA's mission today, because that's what the HOME-ARP funds are for. Next slide, please. And here's just a brief overview of some of the many entities that CDA funds and some of the many programs. And the truth is that CDA does very little, and in fact, nothing alone. We are a pass-through entity, and we're lucky to have amazing partners to help us fulfill our mission. Next slide. So what are HOME-ARP funds? Again, they were appropriated in 2021 as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, and the city was awarded, pursuant to a HUD formula, a $10.6 million award. So these are, to begin with, HOME funds. And HOME is a HUD program that is focused on housing production. And it must achieve one of three national objectives. And these are serving low to moderate income individuals or low to moderate income area, eliminating slum or blight, and meeting an urgent need. So in these cases, the national objective that we're meeting is serving low to moderate income individuals, because more specifically, HOME-ARP funds must be spent to serve one of the following four qualifying populations, and these are the unhoused, those at risk of becoming unhoused, which is typically understood to mean those under 30% area median income, those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, and other populations requiring services or housing assistance. And there's actually a pretty wide array of populations that are defined in these entities, but they include individuals grappling with substance abuse or mental health challenges, among others. So that's what this money is for. Let's move on to the next slide. So in order to assess the highest and best use of these funds, what the city did was we held a variety of stakeholder consultations, and we also conducted a survey of the continuum of care. And what we asked is essentially, we provided a variety of options: shelter access services, domestic violence services, mental health services, employment services, food and meal services, public housing services, temporary housing, permanent housing, rental assistance. What services are most critically needed? What is the highest and best use of these funds? And the number one result on the survey was permanent supportive housing. So then after that survey, we held some deeper dive conversations with a wide variety of stakeholders, which are listed here. And we heard a lot of really good feedback, including to ensure that as we're building this housing, we're also investing in the wraparound supportive services to ensure that individuals residing there are set up for success. They also emphasize the importance of accessibility to grocery stores, transportation, restaurants, community services, and recreation, and encouraged us to include universal design in new builds, and to focus on families of different ages, demographics, and needs. Permanent supportive housing isn't just one size fits all. We really heard that we need to invest in diverse forms of permanent supportive housing, ranging from large multifamily buildings to scattered site to tiny homes. And so very grateful for all the feedback, and it is detailed further in our allocation plan, an over 50-page document on the city website, which includes a table which has a few sentences with what we learned from each of these entities. Next slide, please. So we started with a HOME-ARP needs and gap analysis, as we are required to do by HUD. And essentially, this analysis starts with the city's point-in-time count and homeless needs inventory and gap analysis, where essentially we assess what is the total inventory of beds available. And as you can see, the city has over 600 shelter beds currently available, as well as over 300, perhaps over 400, excuse me, transitional housing beds, and well over 1,000 permanent supportive housing beds. The challenge that we face is that those permanent supportive housing beds, which are largely supported with continuum of care funds, it's a wonderful service and a wonderful source of funding, but there's very little turnover among those over 1,900 beds. And so that's why it is so important to build additional permanent supportive housing to support this community. There's also over 400 rapid rehousing beds and about 79 other permanent supportive housing. So what we did is we summed up essentially, here's the inventory, assessed the homeless population, the number who are sheltered and the number who are unsheltered in order to assess the gap. And again, this is all an analysis that we are required to do by HUD. Next slide, please. And this is just zooming out a little bit. If we start with the point in time count and with the unhoused community, it's also really critical from a HOME-ARP perspective to think about those at risk of homelessness. And essentially, when we talk about that, there's a community of about 20,000, well, zooming out, very big picture, the city of St. Louis has about 140,000 households, of which about 78,000 are tenants. Of the tenant households, as you can see, nearly half, about 48% are cost burden, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, on rent, utilities. And when we say that they're cost burden, again, that means that this is a HUD definition of given your median family's budget and needs, childcare, food, healthcare, education, etc. Families shouldn't be spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And again, nearly half of the city's tenants are. And the vast majority of the city's renter households, which are under 30% AMI, are cost burdened as well. And you can see there that that's a community of about 22,000 households, which are under 30% AMI and cost burdened. And in fact, we went a step further and using public use microdata from the census, we analyzed the delta, the difference between what these households spend and 30% of their income. And if you add up those costs just for that community of about 20,000 tenant households, which are under 30% AMI, we calculate that they pay more than $120 million more than they can afford each year. And that, of course, places them at risk of eviction and at risk. And aside from the fact that they probably can't afford food or early childcare or some of these other critical needs, it also places them at risk of eviction. And in fact, when you look at the city's eviction data, which thanks to the Department of Human Services partnership with Ptolemy, we have really good data on eviction trends in the city. What we found is that pre-pandemic, the city was averaging around 15 or 16,000 evictions a year. During the pandemic, during 2020, 21, 22, evictions hovered closer to 10,000. But now we've seen an uptick in 2023, and we're currently on track to go over 13,000 evictions. And again, it's primarily folks in this segment of the city's population, folks under 30% AMI who are severely cost burdened, that are at high risk of eviction. And again, is part of the community that we hope to serve with permanent supportive housing, or those at risk of becoming unhoused. Next slide. So here are a few examples of permanent supportive housing that across the city that the city is investing in. The first one in different models, including scattered site, including a large multifamily facility and tiny homes. And again, we actually used 3 projects, Marquette Homes, Doorways, and the Veterans Community Project, as sort of examples and samples from a budgeting perspective in order to really understand what do the capital stacks of these projects look like, how much gap financing do they need, and how many units can we stretch this $10 million of HOME-ARP funds to fund. And that all is detailed in the plan, those costs per unit, and different assumptions about leverage and construction cost escalation and others. Next slide. So ultimately, where we landed, and I want to emphasize that this is subject to change. This is what we submitted to HUD as our proposed budget, but we anticipate once the RFP, once we've received applications and made awards, that we might ultimately need to amend our allocation plan. But essentially, we wanted to make sure that we were funding three central needs. One being the actual development of affordable rental housing units. And you can see that that's the $5.6 million allocated provisionally to that. But then we also wanted to make sure that we were funding supportive services and rental assistance, project-based rental assistance that really is a form of supportive services. And so we've provisionally allocated $2 million to both of those needs. And essentially, HUD authorized us to issue the NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability for these funds, while we clean up this citizen participation requirement, because the allocation plan was substantially in order. But what we're doing essentially is there's a NOFA out now. It was actually released a few days ago on April 12th, and it invites developers and supportive services providers to apply together. And so what we hope to see is a developer coming to us and saying, we've got this project, 50 permanent supportive housing units, need this gap financing, but we're also applying with our supportive services partner, which has experience serving the unhoused community or those at risk of becoming unhoused, and needs this level of funding to provide wraparound supportive services to this project. And then the other piece, the rental assistance piece, is that we also are very interested and excited to explore and encourage applicants to explore master leases between the developer and the supportive services provider, where that supportive service provider can use funding, supportive services funding, to fund a master lease, so that it can place, so that the supportive service provider can place unhoused individuals or those at risk of becoming unhoused in this development on a long-term basis. And then there's also some administrative and planning funds. And the reason that it's 10%, roughly 10%, but one of the reasons that that's so high is simply because this is grant funds that last through 2030. And that means that CDA needs to be prepared to and have the funding to administer these funds for a long time. Next slide. So we did want to take this opportunity to, in addition to going through our HOME-ARP allocation plan, provide an update to the community about the 2023 Housing Production NOFA, which was again released on April 12th, and we will be holding a separate public hearing focused on the NOFA on April 27th at 2 p.m. But the application deadline is June 2nd, 2023. And we plan to announce awards in August 2023. Next slide. So just a quick overview of the available funds and eligible uses in this NOFA. There is about $10 million of CDBG and home money. This is nearly identical to previous years' spring housing production NOFAs. The big difference, the unique thing about this year's NOFA, however, is that it is not limited to CDA-owned property. Instead, applicants can apply to develop property across the city, whether it's owned by CDA, LRA, or private parties. There are, however, an array of bonus points for choosing to develop CDA and LRA-owned property, as well as bonus points for developing vacant properties and for other priorities as set forth in the NOFA. In addition, we're making the HOME-ARP funds, which we've discussed today in detail, available through this NOFA, and we look forward to seeing applications. And then finally, we've included a $500,000 tranche of American Rescue Plan Act funds for down payment assistance, which we hope to attach to some of the housing that we've already funded, as well as some of the housing that we will fund in this NOFA. Next slide. So with that, that brings my presentation to a close. We'll pause now to take any questions or public comments. I'm not sure we can hear you on the webinar, Tommy, but Tommy mentioned that we have one attendee. So if you have any questions, please jump in and we'll be glad to answer it. Stephanie, is there anything you'd like to add about HOME-ARP? Stephanie on our team did wonderful and extensive work researching and writing the HOME-ARP NOFA. So,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Thank you. No, I don't think there's too much more to address at this time. Just to note the dates of the upcoming public hearings specific to that NOFA on April 27th. We'll go into further detail about those funding programs and the requirements at that time.
Thanks, Stephanie. We'll pause another 30 seconds to let any members of the public who do have questions have an opportunity. But if we hear none, we'll end the public hearing at that time.
Really quick, Noel, can you add an email that people can submit questions to, since this is going to be live streamed on YouTube as well as posted on YouTube afterwards?
Sure. What do we think would be the best one? Info at or?
We should do CDA at.
All right. CDA at stlouis-mo.gov.
Thanks.
All right. Hearing no questions, we'll end this webinar. Thanks all.